I remember it like it was yesterday. I was on duty at the Mercer County Courthouse on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. My name is Sarah Donahue, a 12-year officer with the Trenton, New Jersey Police Department. I've always enjoyed working the courthouse shift, less unpredictable than patrolling the streets, or so I thought. That day, the sky was overcast, promising a storm. I entered the historic building as usual, greeting Jerome, the entrance guard who always saved me an extra coffee. We'd had this routine for years. Good morning, Jerome. How's the movement today? No problem, Donahue. But we have the Ramirez case starting at 9. They say it's going to be complicated, he replied, handing me a cup of black coffee, just the way I liked it. The Ramirez case. Everyone in the department knew the name. Miguel Ramirez, allegedly involved in one of the largest drug trafficking rings on the East Coast. His lawyers were expensive, arrogant, and extremely efficient. They had already managed to clear him of 2 previous charges. I was assigned to security in room 4B, where the preliminary hearing would take place. I arrived early to check everything: emergency exits, positioning, protocol. I was meticulous about this, always have been. Perhaps that's why I've survived so long in this profession that seems to devour the At 8:45, people began arriving. First, the prosecution team. Linda Garza, the lead prosecutor, with her impeccably organized folders and signature navy blue suit. Then the assistants, carrying boxes of evidence. At 8:55, he arrived. Miguel Ramirez, impeccably dressed in an Italian suit that probably cost more than my annual salary. Beside him was Augustus Blackwell, his lead attorney, a man who looked as if he'd been carved from marble, tall, with perfectly coiffed gray hair and eyes as cold as steel. Blackwell had a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom, but also arrogant and condescending to everyone he considered inferior, including police officers like me. Officer Donahue. He nodded slightly as he passed me. I was surprised he remembered my name. The room began to fill. Relatives of the victims, journalists, curious onlookers. I felt the energy shift, that palpable tension that precedes high-profile cases. My hand instinctively reached for my holster, a habit I developed in my early years on patrol. 9:15, Judge Hernandez entered and everyone rose. The proceedings began with the usual formalities. I watched Ramirez throughout. He maintained a neutral, almost bored expression, as if he were in a dull business meeting rather than a hearing that could determine the rest of his life. Prosecutor Garza presented the charges: drug trafficking, racketeering, and 2 counts of first-degree murder. With each new charge, she watched Ramirez's face, searching for a reaction. Nothing. Just that mask of indifference. His eyes occasionally roamed the room, analyzing each person present. It was during the reading of the final indictment that I noticed the change. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to those untrained in observation. Ramirez adjusted his posture, his shoulders tensing. I saw his eyes flick to the exit on his right, then back to me. It was only a second, but it was enough. Something was wrong. I discreetly touched my radio, alerting the other officers. Possible situation in 4B. Stay alert. The hearing continued. It was Blackwell's turn to speak. He stood with his usual confidence, adjusting his expensive glasses on his aquiline. Your Honor, these accusations are completely unfounded. Mr. Ramirez is a respectable businessman whose only fault was to provoke the envy of those less successful. A quote. That's when it happened. Blackwell leaned over to retrieve some documents from his Italian leather briefcase. He looked at Ramirez and said, almost boredly, "Bureaucracy for you," pointing to some forms Ramirez was supposed to sign. It was like a code, in a movement too quick to predict. Ramirez stood. I saw his muscles tense beneath his expensive suit. In that instant, I knew what was about to happen. Years of training and instinct took over. As Ramirez advanced toward the judge's bench, he was already in motion. Freeze, I yelled, drawing my gun. Everyone on the ground, but it was too late. Ramirez had jumped the barrier separating the lawyer's area from the judge's bench. There was no time to think. Within seconds, I blocked the courtroom, ordering all entrances closed. Chaos ensued, screams, people trying to flee, the judge being protected by another officer. Ramirez had something in his hand. I couldn't make out what it was I advanced on him, ignoring Blackwell, who was yelling something about police brutality. 3 steps, and I was close enough. I threw myself against Ramirez's, knocking him to the ground. We fought on the cold marble floor. He was strong, stronger than he looked. I felt a blow to my ribs, then another near my face. But I managed to immobilize him, pressing my knee into his back as other officers arrived to help. "You don't know what you've done," he whispered in my ear as I slapped on the handcuffs. "They're going to kill all of you." After Ramirez was restrained and led away, the room gradually emptied. I stood there, breathing fast, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Blackwell passed me on his way out, his immaculate suit now wrinkled. "It doesn't end here, Donahue," he said, not looking directly at me. That night, as I wrote the incident report, I couldn't get Ramirez's words out of my head. "They're going to kill you all." Who were they? What was Ramirez trying to accomplish by advancing on the judge? I didn't know it at the time, but that day in court would be just the beginning. The beginning of something that would forever change my life as a police officer and as a person. In the days following the courthouse incident, the station's routine was abuzz with rumors and theories. Some said Ramirez had attempted to attack the judge, others that he was simply trying to escape. I was summoned to Captain Harrison's office early in the morning. "Close the door, Donahue," he ordered as I entered. The captain was a man of few words, known for his almost brutal directness. "Yes, sir. You've become the center of attention," he said, throwing a newspaper on the table. On the front page was a photo of me pinning Ramirez to the courtroom floor. The headline read, "Heroine in Blue. Police officer stops courthouse attack." I wasn't trying to be a hero, sir. I know that. But now, you're in their sights. From them? Ramirez isn't just another drug trafficker, Donahue. He's part of something bigger. Operation Shadow has been investigating his organization for years. We believe he has connections to international cartels and possibly people within our own system. I felt a weight in my stomach. I suspected there was more to the Ramirez case than met the eye, but hearing it from the captain made it all the more real, the more dangerous. "What did they find on him?" I asked. "A ceramic blade, the kind that scanners don't detect. Small, but enough to do significant damage." The captain paused, his tired eyes fixed on me. "We believe the target was Judge Hernandez. He's been relentless against the cartels in recent years." I remembered the way Ramirez looked at the judge, that calculated movement. "What happens now?" "Now," the captain sighed. "You need protection. We're transferring Ramirez to a maximum security federal facility tonight. After that, I want you to take a leave of absence." "With all due respect, sir, I don't need permission." "It's not a suggestion, Donahue. It's an order." His voice left no room for argument, at least until we understand the extent of the threat. I left the captain's office feeling a mixture of frustration and unease. I wasn't used to staying away, to hiding. Throughout my career, I'd faced danger head-on. I returned to my desk to organize some pending reports. My occasional partner, Lisa Chun, approached with 2 cups of coffee. "I hear the captain is sending you to the bench," she said, handing me one of the glasses. "Temporarily," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Listen, Sarah." Lisa lowered her voice, looking around to make sure we weren't overheard. "There's something strange about this whole thing. Ramirez's lawyer, Blackwell, was seen last night with Deputy Mayor Wagner. So what? High-priced lawyers always have political connection." "Yes, but that was after visiting Ramirez in prison. And I heard the deputy mayor made some calls after that. Calls to the federal prosecutor's office." I frowned. Wagner had a reputation for cleanliness, a rare politician who seemed to genuinely care about the city. What business would he have with someone like Blackwell? "It might be nothing," Lisa continued, "but I think you should know, considering you're in the eye of this storm, right?" Now, I thanked Lisa for the information and the coffee. I spent the rest of the day finishing paperwork, but my mind was elsewhere, trying to connect the dots. Ramirez, Blackwell, Deputy Mayor Wagner. There was a pattern there I couldn't quite see. At the end of the shift, when most of the officers had left, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Public library parking. 20 minutes. Come alone. Information on Ramirez." My instincts screamed trap, but I also knew that sometimes the best information came from the riskiest sources. I decided to go, but not without precautions. I put on my bulletproof vest under my jacket, checked my weapon, and sent Lisa my location with a message. "If you don't hear from me in 30 minutes, bring backup." The library parking lot was nearly empty at that hour. I parked my car in a well-visible spot and waited, watching every movement in the shadows. After 10 minutes, a man approached. I recognized him immediately. Martin Cruz, one of Blackwell's assistants who had been present in court. "Officer Donahue," he said, his voice shaking. He sounded nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "We don't have much time. What information do you have on Ramirez?" "It's not about Ramirez. It's about Blackwell and the people he actually works for." He handed me an envelope. Inside, there's evidence of bank transfers, recorded conversation. Blackwell isn't just a criminal defendant. He's the architect of this entire operation. What operation? They call it La Pareja. It started as a money laundering operation, but it evolved. Now they control judges, police officers, politicians. They're everywhere. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Cruz swallowed hard. Because you stopped Ramirez from killing Judge Hernandez. He was one of the few they couldn't buy or intimidate. You thwarted years of their planning. He glanced at the envelope in my hands. And because my sister was one of the 17 women in the last 2 years. The police say they're unrelated cases, but they all worked for Ramirez's shell companies. A shiver ran down my spine. I remembered those cases, young women who disappeared without a trace. No bodies found, few leads. Missing persons detectives were frustrated with the lack of progress. "You need to take this too," I started to say, but was interrupted by the sound of tires screeching on asphalt. "They followed me," Cruz whispered, terror evident in his eye. "You need to go. Now." There was no time for more words. A black car pulled into the parking lot, headlights off. I pushed Cruz behind a pillar and drew my gun. "Police? Turn off the engine and get out with your hands visible," I shouted. In response, I received a burst of gunfire. The window of a nearby car shattered. I ducked for cover, but Cruz wasn't quick enough. I watched as he was hit in the shoulder, then in the chest, and fell heavily to the ground. Gunfire continued to come my way. I retreated, seeking a better position, and returned fire. I hit one of the car's headlights, then the windshield. The vehicle abruptly backed up and sped away, disappearing into the night. I ran to Cruz, but it was too late. His eyes stared blankly into the night sky. The envelope he had handed me was stained with his blood. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Someone had heard the gunshots and called the police. Or perhaps Lisa, concerned about my silence, had sent reinforcements. Either way, I knew my life had changed irrevocably that cold night in the library parking lot. The bloody envelope in my hands felt like it weighed a ton. According to Cruz, it held the answers to questions I hadn't even known I needed to ask. But I also knew that from that moment on, I was diving into waters far deeper and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The hours following the library parking lot shooting were a blur of sirens, detectives' questions, and worried looks. I was taken back to the police station to give my statement. Cruz's envelope safely tucked into my inside jacket pocket. I decided not to mention its existence, not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Captain Harrison was furious. "What part of taking a leave of absence don't you understand, Donahue? And what the hell were you doing alone in that parking lot?" "I received some information about the Ramirez case," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my exhaustion. "I thought it was worth checking out, and was it worth it? Because what we have now is a dead man and you almost joining him." I didn't answer immediately. The image of Cruz falling, his blood staining the concrete, was still vivid in my mind. "Martin Cruz worked for Blackwell," he finally said. "He had information about an operation called La Pareja. He mentioned disappearances, corruption, ... double quotes." The captain stared at me for a long moment, his expression impossible to. Then he turned to the other officers in the room. "I want to be alone with Officer Donahue," he ordered. When everyone had left, he sat down heavily in his chair. "You're in on something much bigger than you realize, Sarah," he said, using my first name, something he rarely did. "The federal task force has been investigating Ramirez and his associates for over 3 years. We've suspected connections to corrupt officials, judges, politicians, but we've never had concrete evidence." Cruz mentioned Deputy Mayor Wagner. Harrison nodded slowly. "Wagner has been on our suspect list for some time, but he's careful. Very careful. What do we do now?" We don't do anything, the captain replied, emphasizing the we. You go home, pack your things, and disappear for a while. What? I can't just... This is non-negotiable, Donahue. You foiled an assassination attempt on a federal judge, and now you've witnessed the murder of an informant. The people behind this will stop at nothing to silence. I stared at my superior, torn between anger and a reluctant acknowledgement that he was probably right. Where am I going? Safe house outside Princeton? Special Agent Colin Wilson will meet you there. He's the head of the federal investigation and wants to hear your statement in person. Harrison pushed a piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. Memorize it and destroy it. I left the police station shortly after midnight, escorted by 2 officers to my apartment. I had 20 minutes to gather the essentials, clothes, documents, my personal weapon. As I packed my backpack, I finally had a moment to examine the envelope Cruz had given me. Inside was a USB flash drive, a notebook with handwritten notes, and several photographs. The photos showed Blackwell with several men I recognized: Deputy Mayor Wagner, Police Chief Davis, even a federal judge, Torres. In one photo, they were gathered on a luxurious yacht, toasts being raised. On the back of the photo was a date and a note: celebration. After Montero case was dismissed, $5 million cleared. The notebook contained dates, locations, and amounts. It looked like a record of payments and bribes. Some names were familiar, others completely unfamiliar. On one page, I found something that chilled my blood. Donahue, check for vulnerabilities. Possible problem after court incident. They were already investigating even before the shooting in the parking lot. I put everything back in the envelope and stuffed it into the bottom of my backpack. I took one last look around my apartment, wondering when or if Che would see him again. The drive to the safe house was tense, full of maneuvers to ensure we weren't being followed. We arrived just before dawn, a small, secluded country house surrounded by trees. It seemed peaceful, the kind of place someone would go to escape the stress of the city, not to hide from a criminal organization. Agent Wilson was already there, a middle-aged man with graying hair at the temples and eyes that suggested he had seen more than his share of horrors in his life. Officer Donahue, he greeted me with a firm handshake. I'm sorry about the circumstances of our meeting. Likewise, Agent Wilson. The officers who had escorted me departed, leaving me alone with Wilson in the silent house. Your captain briefed me on the incident in the parking lot, Wilson said as he led me to the kitchen, where fresh coffee was brewing. But I'd like to hear your version. I told him everything, the incident. In court, Cruz's message, our meeting, the shooting. When I finished, I showed him the contents of the envelope. Wilson examined each item meticulously, his face revealing little. When he reached the photo of the yacht, however, he paused. This photo, he said, pointing to a partially visible man in the corner of the image. Do you know who that is? I looked closer. The man's back was turned, only part of his profile visible. I can't identify him. Robert McCall, Wilson said. Assistant Director of the FBI for the Northeast region. He placed the photo on the table, his face grave, which means this conspiracy is even bigger than we suspected. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden light through the kitchen window. We drank coffee in silence for a few minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. What happens now? I asked finally. Now we need to determine who we can trust, Wilson replied. And to do that, we need to fully understand the scope of this La Pereza operation. He pointed to the USB drive. Let's start by analyzing that. Then we need to investigate the disappearances Cruz mentioned. His sister was one of the victims, I commented. Wilson nodded. And if there's a pattern to these disappearances, it might be our best chance to expose the entire organization. We spent the next few hours reviewing the USB data. There were records of bank transfers, recorded conversations, emails. The picture that began to form was disturbing. La Pereza wasn't just a money laundering or drug trafficking operation. It was something much more sinister. Human trafficking, Wilson muttered after hours of analyzing the data. The missing women, they're being trafficked out of the country. The realization settled like a weight on my shoulders. The missing women weren't just unsolved cases or victims of a serial killer. They were people being sold as commodities. But why? I asked, my voice almost breaking. Ramirez already makes millions from drugs and money laundering. Why risk human trafficking? Wilson looked at me with a dark expression. Because some people in this world aren't just driven by money, Donahue. They're driven by power. The power over other people's lives and deaths. He was right, of course. In my years as a police officer, I had encountered all kinds of criminals. Some were driven by need, others by greed. But the worst, the truly monstrous, were those who reveled in the power they held over their victims. We have to stop this, I said, determination building inside me. We'll stop, Wilson replied, but we need to be smart. We have incriminating evidence against powerful people. We need a plan. As the day progressed, we began formulating our strategy. Wilson had trusted contacts in the FBI, people he swore weren't compromised. I had Lisa Chun, my partner in law enforcement, whom I trusted with my life. It was almost dark when we heard the sound of tires on the dirt road leading to the house. Wilson immediately drew his gun, signaling for me to do the same. "Are you waiting for someone?" I whispered. "No," he replied, moving silently to the window. A car approached, headlights cutting through the gathering darkness. Wilson visibly relaxed when he recognized the vehicle. "It's one of mine," he said. "Agent Moore." The front door opened, and a woman hurried in. Agent Claire Moore looked like she'd just come from a raid. She was still wearing a bulletproof vest over her FBI formal wear. "Wilson, we have a problem," she said, ignoring introduction. "Ramirez escaped during the transfer. 3 agents dead." My blood ran cold. If Ramirez was free, there was no doubt he would come after me. "How did this happen?" Wilson demanded. "Professional ambush, vehicles blocking the road, snipers." "Oop. It was a military operation, not a criminal one." Moore looked at me. "And there's more. Officer Donahue's house was broken into an hour ago. Whoever did this ransacked everything. They were looking for the envelope, the evidence, and now Ramirez was free. We need to move," Wilson decided. "This place is no longer safe." As we quickly gathered our belongings, a certainty grew within me. The hunt had begun, and it wasn't clear who were the hunters and who were the hunted. The safe house evacuation plan was executed with military efficiency. Wilson had a second location, ready, a former Cold War bunker converted into an FBI facility, 2 hours away in Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountain. We traveled in 2 separate cars, taking different routes. I went with Agent Moore, while Wilson went alone, carrying Cruz's documents in USB flash drive. The strategy was simple. If one vehicle was intercepted, the other still had a chance of reaching its destination. "So," Moore said as he drove along the back roads, avoiding the main highways, "how did you get involved in this mess?" I told the story again: the courtroom, Ramirez, Blackwell. As I spoke, I realized how almost unreal it all seemed, as if I were narrating the plot of an action movie rather than events from my own life. "I was undercover for 8 months, Moore revealed after I finished my account, working as a bookkeeper for one of Ramirez's shell companies. That's how we identified some of the connections, but we never got any concrete evidence until now." "What is Ramirez like? I mean, in person?" Moore was silent his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead of us. "He's charming when he wants to be. Intelligent. He cultivates an image of a do-gooder. He donates to charities, sponsors educational programs in underprivileged neighborhoods. But behind all that, ... she swallowed. I witnessed him order the execution of a man for a miscalculation in his accounts. He had him delivered to his family in pieces." A chill ran down my spine. I'd faced violent criminals before, but this was different. It was calculated, methodical, evil. "Why La Pureza?" I asked. "What does it mean?" "Purity refers to the high-quality cocaine they traffic, but it also has a more ideological meaning for Ramirez. He grew up in extreme poverty in Colombia, saw his family exterminated by paramilitary. He developed this distorted vision of purifying society. For him, the ends justify the means, and the means are always violent." We continued in silence for a while, just the sound of the engine and the rain that was beginning to fall filling the car. "Do you think we can stop him?" I finally asked. Moore gave me a quick glance before turning his attention back to the road. "Honestly, I don't know. I've never seen such a well-organized criminal operation with so many powerful people involved. but we have something they don't. What? Nothing to lose, she replied with a sad smile. When you're already a marked target, the only option is to fight with everything you've got. We arrived at the bunker shortly after midnight. Wilson was already there, organizing communications equipment and weapons. The place was Spartan but functional camping beds, a small kitchen, and modern surveillance equipment contrasting with the Cold War architecture. "Welcome to Project Arcadia," Wilson said as we entered. "Officially, this place doesn't exist. Only 5 people in the FBI know its location." "And are they all reliable?" I asked, unable to hide the skepticism in my voice after everything I had learned about color. "Try again, and continue. And are they all trustworthy?" I asked, unable to hide the skepticism in my voice after everything I learned about high-level corruption. "3 of them are dead," Wilson replied dryly. "The other 2 are Moore and I that caught me off guard. So no one else knows we're here? Not even the FBI?" "Especially at the FBI," Wilson confirmed. "After we discovered McCall's involvement, we couldn't take any chances. The corruption may have spread further than we realized." He led us through a heavy metal door, revealing a makeshift operations room, monitors displayed feeds from security cameras around the property. A whiteboard was covered with photographs, documents, and lines connecting different elements. "I've spent the last hour organizing what we know," Wilson explained, "based on Cruz's information and what Moore gathered during his infiltration. We're starting to form a clear picture of La Pureza's structure." I approached the painting. In the center was a photograph of Ramirez. Lines extended from it to other photos. Blackwell, deputy mayor; Wagner, police chief Davis, Judge Torres, and several other people I didn't recognize. "This is the inner circle," Wilson said, indicating the photos, each responsible for a different aspect of the operation. "Ramirez is the leader, obviously. Blackwell handles the legal side and political actions. Wagner facilitates permits, municipal contracts, and provides political cover. Davis ensures investigations are blocked or diverted. Torres dismisses cases or rules in their favor when necessary." "What about human trafficking?" I asked, my eyes scanning the board. Wilson pointed to a photo of an elegant woman in her 50s, with perfectly styled hair and expensive jewelry. "Dr. Eleanor Voss, renowned plastic surgeon, Manhattan Clinic. On the surface, a respected professional who performs surgery on celebrities and socialites. Underneath, she oversees human trafficking. Her clinic serves as a processing point, new identities, sometimes physical alterations for premium merchandise." I felt sickened when I heard people referred to as merchandise. "How do they recruit victims?" "Multiple methods," Moore replied, approaching the painting. "Some are lured with promises of modeling, acting, or opportunities abroad. Others are simply kidnapped." Cruz's sister Elena worked as a receptionist at one of Ramirez's shell companies. She probably saw or heard something she shouldn't have. "Were you able to track down any of the victims?" Wilson and Moore exchanged glances. "One," Wilson said finally. "Melissa Gardner, 22. She disappeared 6 months ago. An Interpol contact identified her in a photo taken at a private party in Monaco 2 weeks ago. We're trying to locate her, but ... double quotes, he didn't need to finish the sentence. "What puzzles me," Moore interjected, "is why Ramirez tried to kill Judge Hernandez personally. It's not his style to take such risks. There must be something more to the case that we're not seeing," I commented, studying the board. "Something that made Hernandez such a threat that Ramirez felt he needed to deal with him personally." Wilson nodded. "Exactly what I thought. We need to review all of Hernandez's recent cases, look for connection." We spent the next few hours immersed in research. Wilson had access to secure databases via encrypted connections, allowing us to investigate without leaving a digital trace. Moore worked on a timeline of known events from Operation La Pereza. I focused on Judge Hernandez's cases over the past 6 months. It was almost dawn when I found something. "I think I have something," I called Wilson and Moore. Federal Case Number 2023 CV7891, A. Seemingly routine civil case over an intellectual property dispute between 2 pharmaceutical companies, Nexus Pharmaceuticals and Biogen Solutions. "What does this have to do with Ramirez?" Moore asked, clearly skeptical. "At first glance, Nothing. But I dug deeper. Pyogen Solutions was acquired 3 years ago by a holding company called Meridian Investments. And guess who controls Meridian? Ramirez Wilson concluded, now interested. Exactly. But there's more. The subject of the dispute wasn't just any intellectual property. It was a patent for a new chemical synthesis method related to potent painkillers. Drugs. Wilson nodded. Makes sense. A legitimate patent that could be used to facilitate the production of narcotics. And Hernandez was about to rule against Biogen. I added. His preliminary ruling was issued 3 days before the hearing where Ramirez tried to attack him. That could jeopardize their entire production operation, Moore noted, and it would explain why Ramirez decided to take personal action, Wilson added. It wasn't just about silencing Hernandez, it was about sending a message to any other judge who dared rule against them. A heavy silence fell over the room as we absorbed the full implications of what we had discovered. Operation La Pereza was even more sophisticated than we had initially imagined, not just trafficking and corruption, but also infiltration of legitimate industry. I think we have a weak spot to exploit, Wilson said after a few minutes. Dr. Voss's clinic. If we can get concrete evidence of her involvement in human trafficking, we can begin to dismantle the operation. How are we going to do that? I asked. We can't just break into a luxury clinic in Manhattan. Wilson smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. Actually, that's exactly what we're going to do, but first we need a foolproof plan and some new identities. It was at that moment that the security alarm went off. One of the monitors showed a vehicle approaching along the access road. We're compromised, Wilson said, immediately drawing his weapon. Take only the essentials. We have 90 seconds to evacuate. There was no time for questions. I grabbed my gun, the cruise envelope Wilson had left on the table, and followed the agents to an emergency exit hidden behind a fake bookshelf. Escape tunnel, Wilson explained as he led us down a narrow corridor lit only by red emergency lights. It leads to an abandoned warehouse half a kilometer from here. How did they find us? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest as we ran. Trace, treachery, or luck, Moore replied, his voice tense. We'll find out later if we survive. The sound of gunfire echoed distantly behind us. They had entered the bunker. The hunt was now literally on our heels, and our survival depended only on our speed, wits, and perhaps a little luck. The escape tunnel ended in a hidden trap door beneath an abandoned warehouse, just as Wilson had said. We emerged into a dusty space filled with empty crates and machinery covered in tarps. The smell of mold and old oil permeated the air. We don't have much time, Wilson said, moving quickly to a back area. He moved some boxes aside, revealing a metal panel on the floor. He entered a code, and the panel opened, revealing a small arsenal of weapons, ammunition, tactical gear. Always prepared, I commented, impressed. Healthy paranoia, he replied, handing out equipment. Only the paranoid survive in this business. Moore was already on his phone. I've activated the Phoenix protocol, he informed her. If someone at the FBI is tracking us, it will create false positives in 6 different states. Good, Wilson approved. Now we need to split up. It's safer this way. Where are we going? I asked, checking out the gun. He handed me a SIG Sauer P226, different from my usual Glock, but familiar enough. You're coming with me, Donahue, Wilson said. We're going to New York. If Voss's clinic is the weakest link, we need to exploit it immediately. What about me? Moore asked. Go back to DC, discreetly. We need someone inside the system, monitoring communications, identifying who is involved in the FBI. Moore nodded, though his expression betrayed concern. Be careful, Colin. You know what happens to agents who go rogue. A meaningful look passed between them, hinting at a shared history I hadn't heard. Wilson simply nodded in response. We'll meet in 7 days at the secondary location, if all goes well, he said. If one of us doesn't show up, ... We assumed the worst and carried on, Moore added. They hugged briefly, a quick but emotionally charged gesture. Then Moore turned to me. Keep him alive, Donahue. He's stubborn and thinks he's indestructible. I'll do my best, I promise. Moore left through a side door, disappearing into the darkness. Wilson was already rummaging through another box from which he pulled out fake identification documents. "From now on, you're Michelle Peterson, a security consultant from Seattle," he said, handing me a passport, driver's license, and credit cards. "And I'm David Grant, a private investor. We're a couple visiting New York for a consultation with the renowned Dr. Voss. Shall we go in through the front door?" I asked, surprised by the audacity of the plan. "It's the last place they looked for us," Wilson explained. "Besides, we need to see the inside of their operation, find out how they select their victims." There was logic in his reasoning, though the idea of walking straight into the wolf's den made me deeply uncomfortable. What if Voss recognizes me? My face was all over the newspapers after the incident in court. Wilson pulled a box from another drawer. "That's why you're going to need a little makeover." 2 hours later, I barely recognized myself in the rearview mirror of the car we'd acquired from a nearby parking lot. My dark brown hair was now blonde, cut in a sleek bob. Blue contact lenses replaced my naturally brown eyes. Expertly applied makeup subtly altered the contours of my face. To complete the disguise, I wore designer clothes I could never have afforded with my police salary, an ensemble that projected the image of a wealthy, confident woman. Wilson had also transformed. His gray hair was dyed black, and he wore thick-rimmed glasses that completely changed his appearance. A tailored Italian suit completed the look of a successful businessman. We drove to New York mostly in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. It was strange how completely my life had changed in just a few days, from an ordinary police officer to a fugitive pursued by an international criminal organization, traveling under false identities with an equally undercover federal agent. "How did it come to this?" I asked, finally, more to myself than to Wilson. He glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "This life? Or this specific case?" "Both, I think," Wilson sighed, a weary sound that suggested the weight of many years of carrying. "I've always wanted to make a difference," he began. "Movie stuff, I know. I joined the FBI believing I could change the world, fight evil, and for a while, that's exactly what I did. Domestic terrorism, arms trafficking, money laundering schemes. I caught some big fish, saved some lives." He paused, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. "Then, about 5 years ago, I started noticing patterns. Cases being dropped without explanation, informants dying under suspicious circumstances, operations failing due to mysterious leaks. At first, I thought it was just bureaucratic incompetence, but the more I investigated, double quotes, "you found more rot," I added. "Exactly. La Pereza isn't just another criminal organization, Sarah. It's a cancer that's spread throughout the system. Police, judiciary, politics, FBI. They have people everywhere. And they're not just people corrupted by money. Some actually believe in Ramirez's twisted ideology." "What ideology?" "They see themselves as purifiers of society. Ramirez grew up seeing how government corruption destroyed his country, how politicians sold out his people for a few dollars. In his warped mind, he's not just profiting, he's punishing a system he considers inherently corrupt." "Corrupting him further," I observed wryly. "The irony is not lost on me," Wilson agreed. "But for fanatics like Ramirez, the end justifies the means, and the end in his case is absolute power." We arrived in New York shortly after noon. Wilson had booked a room at a luxury Manhattan hotel, part of our penthouse as a wealthy couple seeking Dr. Voss's services. "We need to establish ourselves first," he explained as we entered the elegant lobby. "Create a digital presence, get seen in the right places. Voss's practice is exclusive. She doesn't accept just anyone who shows up with money." "How much time do we have?" 2 days to establish our coverage. On the 3rd, we have a consultation with Voss." "You already had an appointment?" I asked, surprised. "Moore took care of that before we parted ways. Part of the Phoenix Protocol included activating some dormant identities maintained. Michelle Peterson and David Grant have complete history, active bank accounts, and even social media profiles." The hotel room was opulent, overlooking Central Park. 2 king-size beds, elegant decor, and a minibar stocked with top-shelf liqueur. It was a world apart from my modest apartment in suburban Trenton. "Relax a little," Wilson suggested. "Take a shower, Order some room service. We need to look rested and confident when we go out tonight. Tonight? Dinner at Le Bernardin. It's where Manhattan's elites strut their stuff. Rumor has it, Voss frequents the place on Wednesdays. We need to be seen, maybe even accidentally bump into her before our official appointment. I nodded, understanding the strategy. Establish informal contact first, plant the seed of familiarity. It was a game of patience and precision. While Wilson worked on his laptop, further configuring our digital footprint, I took a long shower, trying to wash away the fatigue and fear of the past few. Under the hot water, I allowed myself a moment of vulnerability. Silent tears mingled with the water as I thought of everything I had left behind, my apartment, my job, my identity. But as I dressed in the elegant black dress that was part of my new wardrobe, a renewed sense of purpose washed over me. If we could dismantle La Paresa, we wouldn't just be saving my life or seeking justice for Martin Cruz. We would potentially be saving dozens of women from terrible fates and cleansing a system corrupted to its core. Ready to dine with the sharks? Wilson asked as I emerged from the bathroom, now completely transformed into Michelle Peterson, security consultant and successful woman. As ready as can be, I replied, adjusting the pearl necklace that completed my look. As we left the hotel, I couldn't help but think we were about to enter the most dangerous phase of the mission. It was one thing to run from shadowy assassins, another thing entirely to willingly enter their territory, smiling and pretending to be part of their world. But as Wilson had said, sometimes the safest place is the wolf's den, especially when the wolf doesn't know you're a hunter in disguise. Le Bernardin was exactly as expected. A temple of exclusivity and opulence. Crystals sparkled under discreet lights, silver gleamed on immaculately set tables, and the murmur of sophisticated conversation filled the room. Wilson, or rather, David Grant, moved through the space with the effortless confidence of someone accustomed to elite settings. I followed her lead, channeling everything I'd observed in wealthy and powerful women throughout our motto led us to a strategically positioned table, not too central to attract undue attention, but visible enough to be noticed by the right people. Smile more, Wilson murmured as we sat down. You look tense. I'm tense, I whispered back, forcing a smile. Half the people in this restaurant probably make in a day what I make in a year, and that's exactly why you're here as Michelle Peterson, a consultant who charges $1,000 an hour for her cybersecurity expertise. He replied with a charming smile, loud enough to be heard by the neighboring table. I understood the game immediately, establishing our cover publicly. I just tell paranoid CEOs what they should already know, I replied in the same tone, leaning forward slightly as if sharing a private secret. Most of them can't even create a decent password. Wilson David laughed, his eyes darting around the room as he feigned complete attention on me. She's here, he murmured from behind the menu. Table by the window, red dress. I adjusted my position, allowing myself a casual glimpse. Dr. Eleanor Voss looked exactly like her picture, elegant, impeccably dressed, with the kind of cold, calculated beauty that only money and privilege can cultivate. She was dining with two distinguished-looking men, one younger, athletic, clearly her date, the other older, gray-haired, whom I recognized from the photographs as Senator James Whitmore, a member of the Homeland Security Committee. Interesting company, I commented, turning my attention to Wilson. Very, he agreed. Whitmore has been vocal against human trafficking in the Senate. Apparently, his crusade doesn't extend to his dinner companions. Dinner proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance. We ordered extravagant dishes and discussed fictitious business at a volume calculated to be partially heard. Wilson mentioned dissatisfaction with previous procedures and a desire for absolute discretion, bait thrown out for anyone who might be listening. As we enjoyed dessert, an elaborate chocolate souffle that probably cost as much as a day's worth of police work, I noticed Voss looking in our direction. It wasn't a casual glance, but an appraising, calculating one. She had noticed our presence, noticed our apparent wealth, and, we hoped, heard strategic snippets of our conversation. She took the bait, I murmured to Wilson when our eyes met briefly. I maintained a polite smile, as if we were simply acknowledging another member of high society. Don't get carried away, he warned, though he also smiled. First phase complete. Now, we just have to wait for her to do her research on us. We left the restaurant an hour later, perfectly portraying the role of an affluent couple. In the taxi back to the hotel, we could finally relax our facade. Do you think she'll check our identities? I asked. I'd count on it. That's why Moore has such detailed profiles. Michelle Peterson has a professional website, client reviews, and even some appearances at cybersecurity conferences. David Grant has a venture capital firm with legitimate investments. We just need to keep up the facade until we get into the clinic. Back at the hotel, Wilson spent another hour checking emails and messages on secure devices, looking for updates from Moore. I studied the floor plan of Voss's clinic that he'd obtained through contacts at City Hall officially to check emergency exits, but really, looking for suspicious areas, unaccounted spaces, anything that might indicate where victims might be temporarily held. I found something, he said, pointing to the plan. Look at this space between the third and fourth floors. It's too big to be just mechanical. Wilson examined the drawing. Good eye. It could easily be an entire unregistered floor. That's where I'd hide an illegal operation. How are we going to access it? There shouldn't be any obvious entrance. We'll have to improvise. Once we get inside, he replied. First, we need to get through the initial consultation and gain access to the clinic itself. We slept little that night, each of us lost in thought about what was to come. The next morning was spent reinforcing our false identities. An ostentatious breakfast at the hotel restaurant, shopping on Fifth Avenue, and lunch at another exclusive restaurant, all to create the impression of a wealthy couple seeking the best services money could buy. Finally, the day of our appointment arrived, dressed in expensive clothes and projecting confidence. I walked with Wilson into Voss's clinic, an elegant building on Park Avenue, with a discreet facade and visible, but not overt, security. The reception area looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical clinic. Italian marble, original artwork, and elaborately arranged fresh flowers. The receptionist, a young and exceptionally beautiful woman, greeted us with a practiced smile. Mr. and Mrs. Grant, welcome to Voss. Aesthetic Medicine. The doctor will see you shortly. Would you like some tea or champagne while you wait? Champagne would be lovely, I replied, adopting the bored tone of someone accustomed to luxury. As we sipped champagne from elegant crystal flutes, I discreetly observed the surroundings. Strategically placed security cameras, doors requiring access cards, discreetly positioned security guards, dressed like employees, but with the unmistakable physique and posture of trained personnel. Much more security than a normal clinic would need, Wilson muttered, apparently commenting on the decor. 15 minutes later, we were ushered into Dr. Voss's private office. She greeted us personally, a gesture the receptionist said was reserved only for special clients. Mr. and Mrs. Grant, it's a pleasure to meet you, Voss said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. His smile was professional, but his eyes were calculating, assessing. I've heard great things about Mrs. Grant's work in cybersecurity, so she had done her research as we expected. Michelle, please, I replied with an equally calculated smile. And I must say, I've also heard fascinating things about your work, Dr. Voss, especially about your discretion with certain procedures. A flicker of something interest perhaps passed through Voss's eyes before his professional smile returned. Discretion is the basis of my work, she replied softly. Now, what can I do for the Grants today? Wilson took the lead, explaining how we were interested in procedures beyond the conventional. He mentioned connections with clients in the Middle East, hinted at frustration with legal limitations in the U.S., and hinted that money was no object for extraordinary results. I carefully observed Voss's reactions as Wilson spoke. She maintained a neutral, professional expression, but there was a subtle shift in her body language, a slight relaxation, an almost imperceptible lean forward. She was interested. I understand your frustrations with certain limitations, she said finally, choosing her words carefully. For select clients, I occasionally offer consultations at my private facility. That's where we perform our most innovative procedures. That sounds exactly like what we're looking for, Wilson replied with calculated enthusiasm. Excellent, Voss smiled. There's usually a selection process, but given your profile and specific interests, I can arrange it for tomorrow. Would that be acceptable? Perfectly, I replied. Voss pressed a button on his desk. Rebecca will escort you out and provide details for tomorrow. Please note that the private facility has strict protocols, no phones or electronic devices. For obvious privacy reasons, we nodded in understanding, exchanging glances that conveyed our mutual satisfaction. The first phase of the plan had worked perfectly. We were about to gain access to Voss's true headquarters. As we left the clinic, Wilson discreetly squeezed my hand, a gesture of encouragement, but also of warning. We had gained access, yes, but we were about to enter even deeper into the wolf's den, without reinforcements, without communication with the outside world. And if Voss found out who we really were, there would be no one to rescue us. Dr. Voss's private facility wasn't what I expected. Instead of a secret floor in her Park Avenue clinic, we were taken to a private helipad the next day, where a sleek helicopter was waiting. The doctor values the privacy of her special clients, the pilot explained as we settled into the luxurious leather seats. Wilson and I exchanged quick glances. This significantly complicated our plans. Without knowing where we were going, without any external communication, we would be completely vulnerable. During the roughly 30-minute flight, I watched out the window as Manhattan fell away, and we flew over what appeared to be the Hamptons, the summer retreat of New York's ultra-wealthy. Finally, the helicopter began its descent toward a beachfront estate, a modern glass and concrete mansion, secluded by sprawling gardens and surrounded by a high wall. "Welcome to Sanctuary," said an elegant assistant waiting for us at the property's private helipad. "If you could hand over your electronic devices, please. They will be returned upon your departure." I handed over my fake phone without hesitation. We'd expected this, and there was nothing on it that could compromise us. Wilson did the same with his phone and watch. Inside, the mansion was a perfect blend of state-of-the-art hospital and luxury spa. Contemporary artwork adorned immaculately white walls. Staff in elegant uniforms moved silently through the hallways. There was an air of absolute exclusivity, and something else, something that made my police instincts blare. "Dr. Voss will see you in her private office," the assistant informed us, leading us down a seemingly endless hallway. "She's finishing a procedure." As we walked, I discreetly observed every detail. The doors had advanced security systems, biometric readers, not just access cards. Surveillance cameras were strategically placed, some obvious, others barely noticeable. And the employees who passed us had that unmistakable posture of trained security. Wilson held my hand like a loving husband would, but I felt a small pressure on my fingers. Our silent code for stay alert. We're in danger. We finally reached a dark wooden double door. The assistant knocked softly and, after hearing permission, opened it for us. "Mr. and Mrs. Grant, please come in," Voss called from behind an imposing glass desk. His professional smile seemed different here, more genuine, more relaxed. This was his territory, his private kingdom. "Your facility is impressive, Doctor," Wilson commented, perfectly playing the role of the awestruck wealthy client. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. Here we can offer services that would be complicated in Manhattan." She gestured for us to sit in the elegant armchairs in front of her desk. "Now, let's talk about what really brings you here." Her gaze fixed on me, the evaluator, the clinician. I felt like a product being inspected, not a patient. "I understand you're interested in our premium procedures," she continued. "But before we proceed, I need to make sure you fully understand the exclusive nature of what we offer." "We are aware," Wilson replied confidently. "Our contacts in Dubai were quite specific about your unique capabilities." A perfectly shaped eyebrow rose. "Dubai? Interesting. I didn't know my reputation had reached this far." "It's a small world for those who can afford excellence," I commented, maintaining my role. Voss smiled, apparently satisfied with our answer. She pressed a button on her desk, and a wall slid open, revealing an adjacent room. My heart sank at what I saw. It was an operating room as modern as any state-of-the-art hospital, but with equipment I'd never seen before, and in the center, on a gurney, was a sedated young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old. "This is the part of the consultation where I usually separate the genuine clients from the merely curious," Voss said. his tone now cold, clinical. "What we offer here goes far beyond conventional cosmetic surgery. We offer complete transformation." She walked over to the unconscious young woman, touching her face with something close to pride. "Permanent physical modifications, new identity, and for truly exclusive clients, premium merchandise." Wilson squeezed my hand again, this time a warning to stay calm, to not react. I knew my police instincts were screaming to save that girl, to arrest Voss immediately, but we needed more. We needed to get to the heart of the operation. "Impressive," Wilson said, his voice perfectly controlled. "And how long does the entire process take?" 3 to 5 days, depending on the desired modifications, Voss replied, returning to his desk. "And, of course, the price reflects the exclusivity of the service." She opened a drawer and took out a tablet. "Now, if we could discuss specifics, ... It was at that moment that everything fell apart. The office door burst open. 2 security guards entered, guns drawn, and behind them, to my utter horror, stood Miguel Ramirez. "Dr. Voss," he said in that same calm tone he remembered from court, "I believe you are entertaining imposters." Voss looked genuinely shocked. "What does this mean, Mr. Ramirez?" "It means," he replied, his cold eyes fixed on me, "that you are talking to Officer Sarah Donahue of the Trenton Police Department and Special Agent Colin Wilson of the FBI." My blood ran cold. Somehow, despite our disguises, Ramirez had identified us. "Sarah Donahue," Ramirez continued, approaching slowly. "The officer who ruined my attempt to eliminate Judge Hernandez. The woman who thwarted years of planning." Wilson moved imperceptibly beside me, bracing himself for what was to come next. "I must admit, I was impressed by your tenacity," Ramirez said. "Following the leads here, infiltrating our operation, ... Impressive. Pointless, but impressive." "How did you find us?" Wilson asked, dropping the facade now that we were exposed. "Do you really think you're the first agents to try to infiltrate our organization?" Ramirez laughed, the sound cold and humorless. "We have facial recognition technology at every entrance, makeup and hair dye. Don't fool our systems." He turned to Voss. "Continue with the preparations. These 2 will be our guests for some time. I have special plans for them." The security guards approached, guns drawn. Wilson looked at me, and in that look was a clear message. This wasn't the end. Somehow, we would find a way out. As we were escorted out of Voss's office, I thought about how it all had begun with a simple day of court. An arrogant lawyer, a criminal about to strike. How that seemingly routine moment had led me here, a prisoner of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. But he also knew the story wasn't over yet. Somehow, we would find a way to turn the tide. And when we did, Ramirez, Voss, and the entire La Pereza operation would learn why they never should have underestimated a determined police officer from Trenton, New Jersey. Because this story, my story, wouldn't end with his victory. I would ensure it, no matter the cost. And as the elevator doors closed before us, I swore to myself that somehow I would turn this apparent end into just another chapter in a battle. The battle for justice, the battle for truth, the battle that began that day in court when my father, an arrogant lawyer, said dismissively, "Bureaucracy for you in court." His client advanced toward the judge, and I locked the room. Small decisions, big consequences. And now, we were caught in the eye of the storm. But as every police officer learns on their first day on the job, the storm always passes, and I would be ready when it was over.